I met him under a weak sun that never seemed to climb all the way up. Anchorage spring, the kind that pretends to be friendly and then, around 5, reminds you who is in charge. 4th Avenue wore its neon like a hangover, half the signs burnt out, half the windows breathing on the glass. The clubs had names that promised warmth and didn't mean it. I worked nights when the pipeline money made men feel bigger than their coats. You learn to read a room before you learn to read a map. There's the impatient kind of drunk that watches himself in the mirror more than he watches the stage. There's the quiet kind that tips and leaves without making a story out of it. There's the lonely kind that wants to buy 2 people dinner and can barely afford one. And there was him. Small shoulders, thrift store parka, a face that looked older than it was from pitted scars and winter. Soft voice, careful eyes, hands that stayed tucked away like secrets. He said he was a sportsman, a hunter. You could tell by the way he looked at the door when someone large walked in. He measured distance as if it were a habit. He laughed at his own jokes fast to get them out of the way. He said he baked mornings, real bread, and that he had a wife who didn't like late nights. He said he wasn't like the rest. They say that when they're exactly like the rest and when they aren't. He offered me a ride because it was cold, and he said a decent man doesn't leave a girl to wait for a cab at midnight, not with the ice still slick on the curbs and the wind kicking like a mule up C Street. He didn't push the money. He didn't push anything, just kindness, packaged right. The kind you can return later and feel bad for doing it. I live out by Muldoon, I lied. I didn't trust him with the real address I was using that week, and the lie came out smooth, like I'd been saving it. He nodded and said that was on his way, which it wasn't, not for any man who didn't want it to be. He opened the truck door for me like a gentleman in a movie, and there it was. Something small and hard where there should have been nothing at all. A pair of cuffs half hidden under a blanket. A coil of rope so clean it seemed never to have been used. The floor mat smelled like old coffee and something sweet under it, like metal that has known warmth. I told myself a story right then, quick as a match. Hunter. Trapper. Tools. Alaska men carry all kinds of things. He drove with 2 hands, 10 and 2, and checked the mirror less than I wanted him to. Small talk about weather and cars and how the radio seemed to know when you needed a good song. When we passed Merrill Field, he looked at the sky like a man looks at a clock. The plane lights winked. The runway washed a sound over the cab that made me think of enormous insects. Ever been flying? He asked. On a 737, I said. Seattle and back, once. Not the same, he said, and I felt the sentence move past me like a shadow. He missed my street on purpose. I didn't correct him on purpose. The cab filled up with the quiet every woman knows, thin as thread, strong as wire. He turned down a side road that looked like every other side road. The snowbanks were gray where the plows had shoved them back. The trees were black-boned and tired and ready for summer that was still a rumor. When he parked, he let the engine idle. He looked at his hands where they rested on the wheel like he was checking a recipe. Then he turned the key and the truck died, and the quiet rushed in like a flood. Listen, he said, gentle as a schoolteacher. I don't want to hurt you. They always say it right before they do. He moved in pieces that had been practiced. The gun appeared like a rabbit from a hat. Small, not dramatic, very close to my ribs. The cuffs were quiet until they weren't. The first ratchet sounded louder than the plane that had flown over us at takeoff. I looked at the lock, at the simple geometry of it, and thought, I can pick that, and then thought, with what? Your breath. He talked soft as he worked. Men like this do. They like the words to paint over the hardware. If you do what I say, he told me, this stays simple. I said the thing I learned in a shelter once when we were practicing being brave into mirrors. You don't have to do this. He looked at me like I'd complimented his shirt. I do, he said, not angry. A fact. I have a schedule. He brought me to a house that looked like a place where ordinary meals happen. Ranch style, low roof, a yard that would look friendly with a tricycle in it. Inside, the light did a cheap theater trick on the walls. Warm bulbs, clean surfaces, a smell of cinnamon that didn't come from anything cooking. He had trophies on the walls. Antlers, photographs of himself wrapped in winter success, grinning with something he had taken from the World Fair and Square. Basement, he said, like most hosts say. Bathrooms down the hall. Steps. Concrete cold. A room that had been chosen for what it lacked. Neighbors' ears. Windows that opened wide. Mercy. He didn't touch more than he had to. He didn't make a meal out of fear. He served it like soup and set it in front of me and said grace. You want the worst part to be fast, and it isn't. I won't give you things you don't need. I won't give him new words. He did what he did, and I kept my eyes open and watched for where his habits made a hole I could climb through. He had two ways of looking, straight at you and through you. The through you look came when he was thinking about what came next. The straight at you look happened when he was making sure you understood it wasn't up to you. He liked order. He liked neatness. He set the rope down with the coil just so. He folded the blanket before he put it over a thing. He wiped the gun with a cloth, while telling me what a good idea it would be for me not to scream here. Not now. Not when there was no one to appreciate the effort. Tomorrow, he said hours later. Maybe only minutes. Time was a lake I kept sinking through. We're going for a ride! You like the outdoors? I like being alive, I said through a mouth that didn't want to cooperate. He smiled, the thin kind that knew which side of his face worked better. Me too, he said. When I slept, it wasn't sleep. It was my body dragging me down far enough that the room narrowed to a dot, and then the dot went black, and then a click would bring me back up. Every time I woke, the light had moved, even if the sun hadn't. Every time I woke, I counted the things he'd left too close to me. A small stub of pencil, a bobby pin under the staircase, a nail sticking proud in the framed-in wall you could snag a shirt on. When the door opened the next morning, he was washed and pressed, ordinary as bread. He carried a canvas duffel that sagged the way a bag with rope in it sags. He put a plate in front of me like a diner waitress, eggs, toast, strawberry jam, and watched me as if he might send the plate back for not matching the order. When I reached for the jam, he paused me and unscrewed the lid himself, set it down with the rim wiped clean. I'm not a monster, he said. I like things tidy. Monsters like tidy, I said, and watched the penny drop in his eyes. He cuffed me for the walk to the truck, but loose enough to be pleasant. He dangled mercy like a charm on a key ring. The sky had that watery blue you only see when the cold is lifting but hasn't left. The snowmelt threw its wet light around. He put me in the passenger seat and did my seatbelt for me like a date. He whistled tunelessly while he drove. We went to Merrill Field and he was a different man there. Shoulders up, steps quick, voice gaining a note I hadn't heard. Joy, or the closest thing he could feel to it. The hangers lined up like metal teeth. The super cub sat like a patient insect, yellow and black, nose pointed at a piece of sky only he could see. He opened the door and showed me the inside like he was proud of a clean kitchen. Sparse, wires tidy, headsets in their place, floor clear, nothing to trip over. We'll be above it all in 5 minutes, he said. You'll like it. I can tell you this about fear. It multitasks. Part of me watched his hands on the tie-downs and thought about airflow and lift and how quiet everything gets in the seconds before the world changes shape under you. Part of me scanned for people. There were always people at Merrill, men in ball caps walking like they owned the tarmac, a guy pushing a cart, a woman smoking behind a hanger with a mug clutched in 2 hands. Part of me thought about whether I could make noise here that mattered. He put the duffel in the back like luggage. He put a small case where my knees would be, and I pretended not to notice the sound metal makes when it speaks to metal. He turned his head to check a thing that didn't need checking, and in the turned moment, the cuffs were an idea, not a fact. I slid my wrists. The skin burned. The left cuff popped open a fraction, the way a truth does when you press it hard. Hey, he said softly, and for the first time I heard the stutter, the small trip his tongue took on certain consonants. It wasn't cute. It was a diagnostic, a symptom of how much of his life he had spent organizing himself into a shape that looked like a man. He didn't squeeze my arm. He didn't yank. He applied pressure like a clamp. The cuff closed with that ratcheted sound I will hear at my own funeral if there's any justice in the universe. He put the headset on me like a crown, settled his own, slid into the pilot side, and breathed out. and we became a different kind of problem. I won't make you sit in my lap while we taxi. I won't take you over the trees with me. But I will say this, lifting off in a little plane with a bad man is like going underwater with your eyes open. Everything gets simpler and crueler. The city fell away. The Knik arm lay like a sheet of steel you could cut your finger on. The mountains shouldered up to their work. He flew like he had learned to do it because it made him feel bigger than his mouth. He headed north. He kept low 100 feet, 200, sliding where the air had grooves worn into it by 1,000 days like this. He didn't talk. He didn't need to. The headset replaced conversation with the hum that sits under every Alaskan day. When we set down, it wasn't a landing so much as a decision. Gravel bar, river split, wind numb enough to make the water look like a photograph. The plane bounced once and then decided to behave. He shut the engine down, and the sudden quiet punched a hole in the sky. The world had no walls here. Alder and willow and the pale ribs of drift logs. No house, no neighbor, no road noise, just us and the cold. He unclipped his belt, took off his headset, and two things happened. A raven spoke a word into the air like a swear, and I understood that he brought women here because this is a place where the map runs out. Walk, he said. Not cruel, not tender. The way you say it to a dog you feed and plan to keep. He looped the rope around my wrists, not tight enough to mark, just enough to remind. The gun was there. Small, sure. And the knife was there in the easy place a man keeps a tool when he means to use it more than once. The snow here was old in the shadows and soft where the light had finally accomplished something. Every step made a note in the day. And he liked that. He liked the way the land told on us as we crossed it. I counted his breaths. I counted mine. I kept my eyes soft so I could see the whole picture. The river braiding itself. The rise where the ground firmed. The bright tracks of some animal and the darker, bolder ovals of moose. I looked at the brush where it was thinnest and the bank where it cut like cake. I looked at the breaks. Here, he said after a while, and the word tasted like other girls had stopped here too. He loosened the rope so I could drink by the edge. He liked the performance of kindness. I knelt and dipped my mouth to water so cold it shocked a prayer out of me. I tilted my head and saw, under the arc of sky, a wedge of light fall through brush where alder had lost ground to melt. A hole in the picture. When he leaned down to adjust the rope, I turned wrong on purpose and pushed hard with my shoulder into his hip. It didn't knock him down. It put surprise where there had been only schedule. He swore softly, disbelieving that anything had happened he hadn't told to happen. I ran. Not a straight line. Not toward the plain or the open bar where the river could see me. I dove toward the mean brush. Alder and willow so thick your own name can't follow you. I chose the place where he would have to turn sideways to fit. Where the long gun would get in its own way. Where the neat man would be asked to get dirty. Branches tried to comb me out of the world. My coat tore a sound from itself and left a rag hanging like a flag. The snow patches were rotten, and I fell through into melt that soaked my jeans and ran down into my boots and begged me to stop and apologize. I didn't. The rope still circled my wrists. The cuff still bit. I pulled my arms to my chest to protect them from the branches and rammed myself deeper into the green dark. He didn't yell. He didn't waste breath. He moved fast, and the progress sounded like a man taking apart a room he had spent a long time arranging just so. The gun. Yes, the single violent pop smacked the brush over my head, and a shower of twigs came down like dry rain. He had to raise the muzzle to get over the tangle. That bought me 2 breaths. I spent them well. The ground dropped in a way I couldn't see. I went knee-deep in a slick of old glacial silt and new water, hands breaking my fall on something that had once been a tree and was now a suggestion. I let myself fall all the way, rolled and pressed into the stink and the cold and the blind root. And the world said, "Fine. Have it your way." It closed above me. Willow whips wrote cursive on my cheeks. He came parallel, not stupid, reading the animal paths the way a man reads a story he already knows the ending to. The second shot cracked the air more far away this time. He was guessing, and that meant we were equals for 1 heartbeat. I put my face in the mud to stop the shine of skin from giving me away. I breathed through my mouth and took a small life into my lungs. Melt and old leaves and the bodies of insects, everything past tense and patient. The cold wanted me to stop. It wanted to tuck me in. I told it later. I told it to hold that thought. He slowed. Men like him make speed into a problem they can solve with practice. They don't like the parts they can't see. The brush cracked 3 bodies away. He circled. He tried to use me to triangulate me. He kept thinking about the plane, the short runway, the tower, the timing, a dozen other little clocks he'd wound that morning, all ticking toward noon. Time is a weapon. So is quiet. I gave him both. He stood very still. I could smell him when the wind did a thing to my favor. Metal, soap, wheat from the bread that had been made in a different version of his life. He was patient enough to be dangerous, but not patient enough to outwait the river. The water changed its song. The melt deepened. The soft places got softer. The sandbar he'd used 100 times to get the right takeoff was shrinking under the day's slow teeth. He swore again. A small sound that didn't expect an answer. He moved back toward open ground and then angled to cut off where I should be if I were thinking like a deer. I am not a deer. I crawled, swimming through branches, and trusted the way the alders elbowed each other in tight, sour little knots to hide me. My wrists hurt with that clean kind of pain that demands you admire it. I shoved the loop of rope under my boot and pulled, skin tearing, until it went loose enough that I could slide one hand out like pulling it from a thick sweater sleeve. The cuff stayed. The rope fell. My hand looked like I had stolen it from a butcher shop. I didn't cry. Not because I'm brave. Because crying is what you do when it's over, and this was not going to be over for a while yet. A willow banked the river in a low tunnel. I rolled under it, and the water grabbed me the way a mother grabs a toddler who has made a bad choice, fierce, certain, lifting me just enough to put the cold into all the places it hadn't won yet. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from giving the day more sound. He fired once more, not at me, but into the coward brush, a way to say, "Answer me." Birds rose and drew their complaint on the sky. I crawled until the world tipped up again and a spine of earth gave my knees a reason to live. I came out onto a place the river had forgotten recently. Mud like cake, a bright layer of driftwood silver as old scars. In the distance, downriver, something that might have been a path or might have been the imagination that saved me. He saw the movement. He was good at catching the one wrong brush tip that moved against the wind. The last shot snapped a branch above my head and the wood spit splinters into my hair. Then the empty click, and then the soft mechanical hurry of a man reloading. That was the sound I had been waiting for, because it is the sound that makes every man smaller for 3 seconds. I stood up in the open like the worst idea I ever had and ran, not away from him, but across. Lateral is a word you don't think about until someone is trying to draw a straight line through you. I went sideways into a cut I'd noticed when I didn't know I was noticing. Beaverwork, a ditch half flooded with the dull glint of ice still clinging to the sides. I jumped, slid, fell, became half water. A branch raked my scalp and my vision went white, then red, then stung back into color. He came after me. He didn't run in the way men run in movies. He moved like a craftsman who had miscounted nails. Annoyed, precise. He had to step over the same small things that wanted to trip him because I had pulled them loose with my panicked body. In that way, he was following me, and that is a thing you can use if you're mean enough to your own luck. The ditch curved under a thicket. The thicket ended at nothing. Nothing was a drop. I didn't think. I slid. Gravity took me, and I let it. The river below opened its arms the way a stranger at a bus stop does when you fall, and he doesn't feel like being a hero today. I hit, and the cold took my name, and wrapped it in wool and put it on a high shelf. When I came up, I smacked a log with my ribs, and the sound my body made told me I would remember ladders and coughing for months. I grabbed the log and let the river choose a direction. The thicket above held him the way a jealous ant holds a secret. I saw his face framed in ugly twigs, looking down, eyes flat with calculation, mouth trying to decide which way to go to stay on schedule. He watched me skip away like a stone he hadn't meant to throw. He raised the gun and then lowered it. He measured the drift and the distance and made a call. He went back to the plane. I knew it like I know the taste of cold pennies. He would not leave his best tool. He would not abandon the stage he'd built. He would fly out and set down at a different bar and think new thoughts. He would circle back. He would not forgive me for choosing the river. The current did a small, kind thing and wedged the log against a bend. I let go because I did not want to be found attached to anything that didn't have my blood in it. I dragged myself up into a knot of grass and willow and lay there while the inside of my skull rang like a struck bell. My hands were not hands anymore. They were meat I was borrowing. I slept the way animals do when they're still in the story. 30 seconds, a minute, a gasp, a new sound. The plane, yes, 100 feet up, swinging low, sliding along the river like a yellow dragonfly. I covered my face with silt and the black-smelling weeds and prayed to whichever god invents coincidences. He couldn't set down here. Not enough bar. The river had eaten his runway one bite at a time while I learned to be a smaller target. He went past and then swung out over the valley in a slow, thoughtful loop, and I tucked myself deeper into the earth, and the earth took pity on me. The cold is a storyteller. It doesn't shout. It repeats itself until you believe. I believed. My teeth did the telegraph. My fingers sent tiny messages up my forearms that said, "Give up and we'll stop." The sky wasn't gray so much as empty of anything that might help. I crawled until crawling turned into standing because the shape of the land forced the issue. I stood and swayed like a person trying to remember a dance she'd been good at once. I didn't call out. This wasn't a place that answered. The cut where the ditch met the river was the only surgery the land had seen in a while. Everything else was old work. I followed the line of bank where meltwater scored the dirt. My boots made a sound I wanted to apologize for. I listened for the plane. Men like him treat the air like a path they own. He would try to see me from above and mark me like he marked everything else. The bush doesn't love or hate you. It simply insists. Alder took its toll. Willow asked for skin. The glacial silt held my steps too long, like it was trying to barter. I traded strips of coat and the last layer of feeling in my left hand for forward motion. The river bent into a place where the land half-remembered road. Tire tracks from last fall in the hardpan, softened by winter, not driven since. I crouched and touched the old ridges and felt stupidly comforted by the proof of other people. The tracks climbed the bank and went into spruce that made a dark you could persuade yourself was shelter. I followed. Under trees, the air changed. It smelled like the inside of a church no one goes to anymore, resin and dust and something that used to be holy. The wind was less rude. The snow left in old patches was pocked by squirrel steps like beads on a string. A raven watched me from a pew of branch and said my progress out loud to whatever god keeps a list of the living. I hate ravens. The tracks left the trees and walked me into a cut 2 ruts wide that could take a truck in summer if the driver had both faith and insurance. I crouched when the sky widened and listened to nothing and decided the nothing was safe enough to borrow for a minute. A stump gave me a place to sit and hate myself for sitting. I cut the rope with a shard of driftwood I'd pocketed without knowing I had. It worked badly, but well enough to leave the loop a suggestion and not a command. The cuff stayed, a metal bracelet that made me, for the first time, a person who knew how cuffs feel after hours. The skin under it was a red, tired eye. He would circle. He would look for what glints. He would try to think like me and fail, and then think like him again and succeed. I needed people. I needed a road that buses had met. I needed a noise that wasn't made by birds or my mouth. The path did that Alaskan thing where it pretends to go on and then shrugs and disappears into bog. I stepped where the tops of grasses looked strongest and cursed every moose that had ever punched holes in a place I now wanted to be a floor. Where the ground looked like it would remember me too well, I went back to brush and chose the argument with Alder again. Better that than sinking to my hip in something that smelled like old iron and gave nothing back. The first sound that wasn't made by me came toward evening the way good things do in the north, reluctant, tired of the job. A 2-stroke. Snow machine, old and fussy, angry at spring. I froze. The sound got larger. A man singing badly got larger with it. He crested a low berm of plowed-up ground, and we almost ate each other from surprise. He was small in the way men can be and still stare down a bear. His beard was the kind that keeps promises. His hat said Arco and had done so for a decade. He wore that broad, practical look you see on men whose days are built from problems that really are problems. He took me in the way Alaskans do, inventory first, explanation later. God Almighty, he said, using the name like a tool he was qualified to wield. Are you hurt? Yes, I said, but not in a way that helps right now. He saw the cuff. He saw the rope. He saw the bare hand and the other hand that shivered like it was trying to sign something to him in a language we both should have learned before today. Get on, he said, like the snow machine was a church and I was a sinner and this was Sunday. We'll go slow. I need police, I said. And saying it out loud like that, let me imagine an office somewhere with a coffee ring on a desk, and a man who had spent all day doing paperwork suddenly standing up so fast his chair lost its balance. Yeah, he said softly. He looked up and did a thing with his eyes that meant he was checking the sky, not for weather, but for something small and yellow. I reckon you do. We went slow. The machine complained when the snow gave up, and the mud took over, and then complained when the snow came back because the machine was built to complain. He put me behind him, and I wrapped my arms around a stranger the way drowning people decide they are in love with anyone holding the right rope. His cabin was more promise than fulfillment. A blue barrel outside for fuel. A plywood door that didn't make a convincing case for itself. He had a radio older than both of us on a shelf, and he spoke into it like he was talking to a relative who could only hear every third word. Copy, the radio said in a voice like a rusty hinge. Mile marker what? Say again. He repeated the part that mattered. Woman, hurt, cuffed, plain. He changed his voice for the last one. Plain, like it meant something to the person listening I didn't yet know. It did. The radio became more alive than it had looked in its whole life. Men spoke in abbreviations that stacked together like firewood. A name I didn't recognize floated up and then sank again. The words Merrill Field and toward Nick and Super Cub made a sentence that began, We might have him if. I got warm enough in that cabin for the cold to insult me for leaving. My wet clothes steamed and I smelled like the river's bad language. He brought me coffee that was startled to be asked to help, and a blanket that had dried dogs in its past. The radio kept trying to bite its own tail with urgency. Name? He asked me, gentle, and I gave it to him, and it sounded like something I had borrowed, like the cuff. You can sit on my bunk, he said. I'll stand. I got a mind to see him. No, I said so fast he smiled. No, I repeated with my whole body. Call them. Let them see him. You stay. He heard the schedule inside that request and nodded. Men like him have their own calendars. He poured more coffee for himself, as if he could fill time the way you top off a cup, and he let me breathe like a person being watched over and not as inventory. When the troopers came, they filled the door and the air and my chest. The first one in looked like a man drawn by a child. Hat too big, jaw too square, eyes exactly the right size for the story I needed them to be in. He took in the cuff, the rope, the mud, the shaking, the smell of panic. He put his hand where it would be normal to put a hand, on the back of the chair, not on me. You did good, he said. Not you're okay. Not's over. You did good. That's Alaska for I believe you, and I'm not going to make you do the hard part alone. He asked me to tell it twice, then tell it again without the parts that would wreck me today. Then tell it once more so the radio could hold it while he did the other work. Calling men who had known him by other names, calling the airport, calling a man owned. I would learn later, started writing a profile on a chalkboard that looked like a grocery list written by God. They put me in the back of a truck that didn't mind the winter dirt in me and took me to a building with light that did not forgive. They gave me a blanket that felt like being called by your real name. They gave me paper cups of water, as if that was the main thing city buildings know how to offer. A woman with a voice like bread asked me if I wanted to call anyone, and I wanted to say the name of someone who had not been alive for years, which is a form of grief and also of stupidity. The detective had a face like an honest boot. He listened without blinking, and then he blinked everything I couldn't hold any longer. When he asked about the plane, he said tail number like it was the secret name of a demon. I shrugged the emptiness that filled my hands and told him what I had. Color, type, the the way the engine sounded like it wanted to brag, but was too well-mannered. He asked me about the house and the trophies and the basement and the way his hands moved, and when I told him about the jam jar rim wiped clean, the detective's mouth did a small, bitter thing. He wrote down tidy the way you underline a word in a Bible, because it keeps showing up. They took the cuff off like opening a gift you didn't want, and were going to re-gift to a better recipient. The skin under it looked like something you don't serve to guests. The doctor didn't touch the worst parts unless he warned me first, and he warmed his hands under the tap, because he understood some kinds of kindness are better theater than medicine, and both matter. He asked if I wanted to make a report about parts I won't put into your ears because they don't need to live there. I said yes. He nodded like he'd expected me to say that, and been ready for the other answer too. I slept in a place that had a lock all the way through. The room had a loud clock that made me want to cry, and a window that showed me a parking lot and the backs of men's heads and a slice of the chugach that looked like it had removed itself from the conversation. I dreamed of branches that learned my name and said it when they slapped my face. In the morning, the detective came with a photograph and a question people don't ask unless they already know. "Is this him?" The picture showed a man you wouldn't ask for help changing a tire, but you'd take bread from him if he handed it to you in a paper bag at 10 in the morning. Glasses, thin lips, pitted skin like the cold had made a home there years ago. A jaw that looked like it was keeping a secret for someone else. Not handsome, not ugly. Camouflage with a face attached. I nodded. My body said yes faster than my mouth. "We're working a warrant," he said. And there was a sound in the hall, like men who hadn't slept now walking in shoes that weren't polite about it. "Stay here! Eat! Someone will sit outside the door. You don't open it unless they say my name." "What's your name?" I asked finally. He said it like a promise he had made to a lot of people and sometimes kept. They searched his house. They did it slow, the way you handle chemicals that will be dangerous in 6 different ways you can't see yet. I would only hear later what they found: jewelry that belonged to women who didn't need it anymore, a hidden room that believed it was invisible, a map that had learned the shape of 100 secrets and carried their weight with neat little X's. Men wrote the words Knik and Eklutna and Rabbit Creek like prayers, and the map did not argue. The detective came back with the look men wear when they're carrying someone else's grief in their pockets and don't want to sit down because it will come spilling out. "Good work," he said to me, and by that he meant, "You staggered into the right cabin while you still had enough heat in you to say someone's name." And by that he also meant we might get him. "Please don't say good," I said. "Not yet." "Fair," he said. They didn't arrest him that minute. Men like him don't spend their last free morning doing something stupid when they know the law has noticed them. He went about his errands. He put on his coat. He folded his clean shirt on the back of a chair. He tidied things the way he did to calm himself. Menus in drawers, receipts lined up, bread in bags like promises. He walked into one last day like he owned it, and they took it from him at the exact right point. Which is a trick you only pull off when 10 people who don't like each other much do their jobs. I didn't see the cuffs on him. I saw the hallway after and the way the expert quiet fell, as if someone had taken the batteries out of a machine you didn't know was running. The detective sat down. He let his shoulders drop an inch. He said the name out loud to me in a room where the fluorescent light had not done a good thing for anyone yet. Everything after that is paperwork and crying and a parade of faces looking at you like you are both a miracle and a book they wish had one more chapter. People want the epilogue right away. They want him caged and the key thrown into a hard river. They want the list of names to turn into a headstone and the headstone to turn into nothing. They want a word like closure because it sounds like something you can fold and put in a drawer. Here's what you get instead. You get men coming to your door with forms and asking you to describe the knife and the rope and the basement and your own face. You get detectives whose jokes improve as they get more tired and worse as they get closer to the courtroom. You get a DA who says things gently that you don't want to hear at all, like plea and cooperation and admissions. You get a city that learns a new name. It's like teaching a mountain to say please. It takes repetition and bad weather, and some people refuse. The radio clothes the syllables in a tone it uses for other kinds of bad news. The paper prints photographs you don't want to see but can't stop looking at. The map appears on the screen with little pinned X's, and the anchor's voice puts sorrow in a place you didn't know a voice could hold. You get girls who worked forth with you now sitting in your kitchen, afraid of your window and of the way the blinds move when the heater comes on. You get someone's boyfriend who said you were overreacting before, bringing you soup and not making eye contact. You get a mother you haven't called in a year, calling you and then hanging up and calling back, saying your name like it still fits. You get one woman who survived something else, a different man in a different state, writing you a letter she never intends to send, saying, "We carry this like a bucket, don't we? And if we met, we could set it down together for 10 minutes and laugh at how ugly our hands have gotten." You get the map. A detective showed it to me in a room so bright it felt like a stage. They had redacted what they needed to, but you can't redact the feeling of seeing a place you almost died translated into paper and pushpins. Nick was a word I had only ever heard said in bars and on weather reports. Now it was an ache. The detective's finger hovered, then landed on a spot not far from where I had gone into the water. "Here," he said. "He liked here. He liked a lot of places." I said before my mouth remembered it didn't want to be brave. They took him to court. He did not look like a movie villain. He looked like a man you'd hold the door for at a bakery because his hands were full. He kept his eyes where his lawyer told him to keep them, on the table, on the judge, on some spot on the wall where the paint had a bubble. The room breathed when his gaze moved, shoulders folding in, and then not. I did not want him to look at me. I wanted him to look at me so I could spit his name into his eyes and then pick it back up again and put it somewhere only I could find. I told what I told. The judge took it in like this was all on his grocery list. The defense asked me the polite version of the impolite questions the world asks women. Were you selling? Were you drinking? Were you sure you wanted to be alive that night enough to be believed today? I said yes to the ones that needed yes and no to the ones that deserved it, and did not flinch at the parts where they wanted me to apologize for existing. They said the number he admitted to like a lottery drawing, 17. Maybe more. They said other numbers too, the years he would get instead of the things some people wanted to do to him in alleys. 4 counts here, plus this much for that, stacked like cordwood. A sentence so long you can't picture it. Just understand that it outlives all of us, and that will have to do. He drew a map for them, they said, and helped them find graves. Showed a perverse kind of neatness even then. The detective told me about one of the girls who had been just bones with her hair under the leaves, and that was the night I let myself break. There is a particular sound you make only once in your life, and I hope you never hear your own. It's a door coming off hinges in a house that isn't built right. Time did what it does. It put other bad news on the radio so we could practice for this one. It let the city go a day without saying the name and then a week. It gave me back the ability to be bored. It let a spring come that was not a liar. It brought salmon and mosquitoes and breakup and the sweet rot smell that is summer's first true announcement. I moved. Not far. Enough to make certain angles of the sky disappear. Enough to make Merrill Field something I pass on my right and don't look at. I learned the shapes of the clouds that mean you should stop and go home. I memorized which gas stations keep the lights on outside the bathroom. On the day he died, years later, the radio gave me the news between traffic and the weather like it was any other math. I stood in my kitchen with my hand on the faucet and waited for a feeling that would tidy everything. What I got was room. Not closure. There isn't a door. There's only a space where a door could go. Room to breathe without measuring it. Room to sleep without rehearsing the morning. Today, if you sat across from me and asked for advice I would not give, I'd tell you this. I stopped flinching at ravens. I stopped imagining the yellow plane when I hear a small engine. I keep quarters in a jar because laundry exists, and I like drawers that have order for ordinary reasons. I go walk by the Knik sometimes with a friend, and I let the river talk without asking it a question. I put my hand on a spruce and feel the pitch tacky on my skin. And I say thank you to the stupid tree like a crazy person, because that day it was the only congregation that would have me. I am not noble. I am not a cautionary tale. I am not a very good storyteller. If what you want is clean lines and a name early enough to turn the channel, I am someone who noticed a bobby pin on a basement floor and a hole in brush and the way a raven spoke. I am the kind of practical that gets called brave by people who weren't there. I am very hard to schedule now. When the weather changes, I still feel it at the base of my skull. The itch, the lesson, the list. I go stand in the doorway and smell what the day plans on doing to me. I keep my coat by the door all winter and my boots where I can find them in the dark. I leave a note for myself on the table sometimes. Eat. Rest. Trust the tunnel. Don't go straight when sideways will do. I am alive. That is not a tidy fact. It is a verb I keep conjugating, even on days when the river in my chest rises and says, "You are small and I am not." I say back, yes, but I am very hard to find in the brush now. How am I doing? Well, now I live across town, keep my boots by the door, and I don't flinch at ravens anymore. Killer reveal. Robert Christian Bob Hansen, the butcher baker. Robert Hansen, 1939 to 2014, was an Anchorage baker and avid hunter who abducted and murdered at least 17 women between 1972 and 1983. He often used a Piper Super Cub bush plane to fly victims to remote areas near the Knik River, where he stalked them through the wilderness. Investigators later seized a marked map and jewelry trophies during a search of his home. Hansen's downfall began in 1983, when Cindy Paulson escaped and alerted authorities, leading to a search warrant and his arrest. He ultimately received 461 years without parole and died in 2014 while in state custody. His crimes inspired the 2013 film The Frozen Ground.